Well, I suppose I've got the inner and outer helical here. These are particularly nasty. That grease is very, very sticky. I'll get a bit of solvent naphtha started on those threads. If I can get the thread started, I'll just work it backwards and forwards there. It's just started. I can work the two sections together to loosen up that filth. Oh, it doesn't feel nice. There's obviously a fragment of something in there. It's just stopped screwing in correctly. Must be some fragment of metal blocking that. It's funny. Right, let's see if I can clean it up a bit. Yeah, that stuff is really packed in hard. That's just dried grease and dust, I suppose. This creates like a paste. It fills up all the corners. Okay, let's see if that will start. Yeah, it's pretty stiff. Oh, it really doesn't want to go. Multi-start threads are always entertaining to get started. That's better. It'll run in from this side. This front edge must be a bit damaged, I think. It's got a rough patch there somewhere. When you've got helical like this, if it's rough in action, if you've got it all clean, there's no obvious inclusions of dust or filth or anything glued in there, and it's still rough, you can polish them smooth with some metal polish. Basically, if it's all clean, you apply some metal polish to the threads and you work them backwards and forwards. And then apply some more metal polish and work them backwards and forwards until things move smoothly. Then all you have to do is flush all of your metal polish away That's much better now. All I've really done here is poke around these threads with a wooden toothpick, and there was obviously something embedded in there that was stuck fast. It was preventing the helical from turning correctly. That's good now. So I'll work this some more because I want to get all of that old grease and rubbish out of there. By working them backwards and forwards, it loosens that rubbish up and then I can clean it away. That feels very good. Wasn't expecting too much trouble with it because after all the focus helical did move before I started working on the camera. You can see by the colour of that there's still a lot of filth coming out of that thread. Another way of dealing with this is to clean it in an ultrasonic cleaner in some solvent, and that will certainly shift some of this rubbish too. I mean, the threads don't even look clean, they're very discoloured. It's just embedded dust and dried grease. I'll get that clean, and then when I'm ready to assemble the mount, I'll show you that. Well, I've selected my organ donor. This one's fairly stripped out by the looks of it. There's no knobs on the top, no shutter, most of the leather's missing. Doesn't have a depth of field calculator, somebody's put a blank piece there. So this will do nicely as a donor, I think. So first of all, I've got to get this top cover off. So hopefully that'll come off without a fight, and it did. And dig my way down to the take-up spool. A lot of these parts will end up getting reused, I would think. That gear set seems to be stuck quite firmly there. Let's just encourage that up. And there are 3 screws that hold the bush in place. One of them is very tight. let's retrieve this take-up spool. And yes, it's complete, unbroken. That'll do the job nicely for us. So the organ donor, I'll pop all that stuff to one side so I don't mix the parts up. Otherwise I'll wonder how come I've got pieces left over after I've finished doing the repair. That's always a bad sign. That was one of the tricks that we used to play on each other when I worked at Kodak in the service department. When people were working away on something suitably complex, you would take a spring from the spare parts department and just casually toss it onto their workbench. And of course when they came to the end of the job they'd have a part left over. And it was always interesting to watch the reactions of what people did when they discovered a part left over at the end of the job. And of course some people would swear and curse and furiously start tearing the camera down to see how they'd managed to leave the piece out. And other people were a bit more circumspect and they would carefully test the camera and to determine whether they'd really left a part out or not. And some people would just casually open their drawer and sweep the part into the drawer and say nothing at all and leave it at that. Meanwhile, back to the real business of getting this together. So we have our take-up spool, so we're off to a flying start there. I need to gather up the pieces for that film advance components there. Most of those I have cleaned and ready to go back, so I'll do that next. I'll start by putting a bit of synthetic grease on the spring here and on the centre where that sprocket film take-up spool goes, and that just clips into place. That's all there is to it with that. I'll just put a little bit of grease on the shaft of the film advance spindle. Just check that's nice and smooth. That's all that was really making that run rough was the dirt and dried grease. Once it was cleaned, it didn't take much, it ran smoothly. I'll just engage the end of that film advance with this ball. There we have it. And there are 3 screws that hold the top of this. I can pretty much tell which ones they are because they're a bit dirty from the old grease. One of them's a little bit chewed looking too, but one of them did give me some grief getting it loose to start off with, so that could easily be the one. Oh yeah, that screw's got a less than wonderful thread. Just checking that that revolves smoothly. It certainly does. Here's our gear. This is forms the ratchet for the rewind and so forth. A little bit of grease in there for this gear. And that fits there. A little bit of grease on the tip of those teeth, I think. That's good. Our springs. There are 2 springs. And it's always entertaining getting them in the right positions. These springs look much the same. I'll pop them up there side by side so you can see them. But one's wound one way and one's wound the other. So naturally it's important that they go in the right spot. So I'll just put that one there. Find the screw that held that down in place. And the other spring goes here. They look awkwardly placed because they are slightly awkwardly placed, but they do work. Our levers here, get this stacked up in the correct order. So where are the other washers and things? That's what I need. That washer goes on there. This lever goes on there. This washer goes on there. This lever goes on there. This lever goes on there. Because it just wants to tip off. And the fixing screw. Which one is it? This one, I believe. We just have to get the fixing screw down through our 2 levers. There are 3 levers, there are 2 washers, and screwed into the housing. And check that all the levers move smoothly, and they do. This spring here needs to hook around the back of this lever, like that. This lever, this spring goes on our shutter release, which of course I can't put in yet because I haven't got the struts and so forth in position. Here is our advanced rewind lever, which goes on like that. And the bush that holds that in position, which of course is left hand threaded. Don't need to tighten that up just at the moment. In this position, this is the advanced position. It allows this lever to drop in on the ratchet so that the film advance can revolve. And in this position, it removes the ratchet so that the film advance can be rewound. So that, excuse me, that's all good. I'll put the rewind on there now. These parts I've all cleaned already, and so I know that they're good to go. There are 3 screws that hold this in place. Once this is done, I can turn my attention to putting the bellows, the struts for the bellows in place. The bellows have had all night for the adhesive to cure. That's more than long enough for them to be well stuck. Just do those 3 screws up. The struts. Let's get these struts ready to go back in. I just lubricate the rear slots there because it's pointless doing the front ones at this stage. I only end up wiping off the grease with my fingers while I'm trying to work on it. So I'll put a little bit of molybdenum paste on the guide rail there for the shutter release. Likewise here, and some on here. Make sure that moves smoothly. Spring goes on here. Now I've got to hook that guide over there and drop the bellows down into the struts down into position. There are 4 screws hold the struts in position. And there are 2 spacers that go top and bottom of the struts. I'll see if I can get the top one in position. Yeah, I can just about see that. I'll get the screw in position there to hold that. And the same at the bottom. I can just see the edge of that washer there and no more. I have to move it across a bit. Now I've moved it too far. Let's bring it back. That's it. No, I can't get that screw to start. See if I can get those holes lined up better. Well, looks pretty good. That's better. And there are 2 screws need to go in the end of the film cassette chamber. Looks good. I'll tighten those screws up. That's the struts back in the body. Just check that they open and close smoothly and that they snap into position well. That's good. So the focus mount can go in here now. That's held in with 4 screws. They're countersunk head screws, large heads, quite short. These screws in this position are sometimes loose. When they're loose, you get a bit of rattle. The shutter and lens assembly will seem a bit loose and rattly. Of course, you have to have the shutter out in order to get to these screws to tighten them back up. All in place. I'll just nip those up tight. Now I'm supporting this with my finger from underneath so that I'm not crushing the struts down as I apply force to the screwdriver to tighten these screws up. And the last one there I want to get to. And that's it. So if I collapse the struts, I can put the screws in place that hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. Might be fun lining these screws up because of course I've had the bellows out. They're probably sitting slightly askew from where they were previously. Let's see if one of these will pick up the thread. Yeah, went straight in. That one's not. That one is. That one's going in. What about this one? Yeah, that's doing up. So that's the bellows fixed back to the back of the front standard and of course glued back into the body. So that part's good. And the focus mount, the inner and outer helical rather. I've had these apart, I've cleaned them and I can see that they've just seized back up. That means that there was still old grease in there and it was just acting like glue. I haven't lubricated these yet. the old grease, it just goes like a lacquer. It'll stick things together. Let's give that one last wipe. There's not really anything coming off there. Right, some helicoid grease would be the answer. Let's do it this way. Usually put the grease on in about 5 or 6 patches around the outside. You don't need buckets of grease. You don't need to pack the threads out with grease. That's counterproductive. Just run that in there. Work that in. Check that it's running smooth. That's good. Wipe off any excess there. And the outer here, of course, this is where the outer helical runs in the mount, and the 2 guide pins need to run in these little grooves there, so I'll put just a touch of lubricant there. Now check that I've got this the right way up, and I happen to know it goes this way. And check to make sure that that moves smoothly. And that's good. So our retainer ring can go in place. I'm just putting a bit of lubricant on the edge of that. This is where it holds down the outer helical. That doesn't need much. That sits on there like that. Now I've just got to find the screws and do them up.